Hello there, it's the 15th of July 2015. My name is Jack Watts and this is a brief market update from AHDB Cereals and Oilseeds. The last month or so has been a volatile time for grain markets. Principally at the beginning of July we saw quite a strong rally in grain prices and indeed in UK feed wheat futures prices, really on the back of some dry and hot weather concerns in Europe. In recent days though, that price rally has come off and we've seen some quite significant declines in price, taking those values down below £130 per tonne. To understand really what's going on, we need to consider the broader context of the market. And if we look at this chart here and we look at line A, we can see that that's the longer term downward or bearish trend in the market, and that's been quite a strong trend for a number of months and indeed years now. However, if we look at line B, that's a more recent trend and is basically an upward trend in the shorter term and basically an indicator of the lows in the market actually getting slightly higher. These two trends are really coming together and that is acting to back the wheat market into a corner. So at some point the market is going to have to break one of these trends, set a new trend, and what's going to drive that will probably be some kind of production event, either good or bad, really driven by the weather. The focus of course now is really on new crop prices, the 2015 price. Let's not ignore what's happening for 2016 price, though there's planting decisions being made, and indeed we're not that far, certainly from planting as well. The eager-eyed of you will also be aware that November 17 prices are available. We need to treat them as largely theoretical at the moment because there isn't going to be a huge amount of liquidity, if any, to enable those prices and that market to actually be traded. Earlier in July we had the annual planting survey data released by ourselves, and that gave us some indications of the areas for harvest 2015, and I don't think really any main surprises were coming out of the data there. From a wheat perspective, we're going to get a little bit more into the detail now. GB area put at 1.87 million hectares, down 3% on the previous year, and principally, to my mind, driven by the need to have greater rotational control of blackgrass, may even be some elements of impacts of three-crop rule in there as well. What will that mean? What could that mean for production in 2015? Well, we need to consider what yield scenarios could play out for 2015. This next chart looks at four scenarios. Scenario 1 uses the previous 5-year average yield, and to my mind that is very much the bottom end, probably even underestimates the production potential of the 15 crop. Normally the 5-year average is a very good indicator of the coming year production, but if you consider the last 5 years, we've got some pretty shocking production years in that, and it's probably underestimating what a typical yield, a normal yield, looks like. If we go straight through to scenario 4, that's based on the extremely good yields we saw in 2014, and bearing in mind we have seen dry conditions this year, potentially putting a little bit of stress on the crop. It's unlikely that we're going to reach that kind of level. So 16 million tonnes probably represents really a big ceiling for production in 2015. So really we're looking between scenario 2 and scenario 3, probably somewhere in the region of 15 million tonnes, maybe even slightly above that level of current perspective. Of course, there's been some dry weather and heat stress concerns, largely in southeastern areas outside of those regions, so conditions have been reasonably okay. We'll be publishing a crop report from ADAS later this month, really to give us a fuller impact assessment of the weather just before we head into harvest. Moving on to global scene and really considering what the drivers are there. Touched on this a little bit earlier, the heat and the dryness we saw earlier in July across Europe has really been a catalyst in the market. As I see it, it probably is going to have a limited impact on key wheat crops. That heat and dryness probably coming too late to have too much of a detrimental impact on wheat production. Probably the vulnerable crops to watch are spring barley, as a spring crop is more vulnerable to those dry conditions at that point in terms of forming yield and indeed quality, and of course maize as well. Remember last year, huge maize crop in Europe because of the very wet conditions through the summer. Very, very different year this year, and we saw the USDA last week cutting their estimates by 2 million tonnes for European maize production. So we should expect really the forecasters probably to follow suit as we get next round of monthly estimates coming through, probably pegging maize crop forecast slightly lower. What that means is that it essentially takes the supply pressure, the high level of supply pressure off of the European feed grain market that we saw last season, and so there's less downward pressure on prices from that perspective. One assumption we can make and probably should make for this coming year is about French wheat quality. 2014 was very, very bad French wheat quality because of the wet summer. It's safe to assume, to my mind, that we should be banking on an improved French wheat quality and essentially more marketable wheat in Western Europe. Contrast that or bring into the fact that we've got a weaker euro and we should have some pretty impressive export pace out of Europe based on those factors. Bring into the fact that we now have a Russian export tariff mechanism in place, and that is a pretty uncertain beast at the moment, and if it does create uncertainty, does create complexities in trading wheat out of Russia, we may well see some business coming towards Europe off of the back of that as well. Certainly one to watch, and certainly yesterday's tender by Egypt saw some business arriving into Romania, so helping EU-wide export pace, but no real activity out of Western Europe. France notably, probably the market waiting to see what quality is delivered after the memories of what we saw in 2014. In complete contrast, in the US, we've seen some very wet conditions in key production states. One of the key impacts has been to delay the tail end of plantings of soybeans, so the market's really grappling with what that may well mean for oilseed supply. Probably won't negate from the big picture of big soybean supplies that we're seeing at the moment, but rapeseed has its own issues that we'll have to keep an eye on and follow, so it sort of divorces itself slightly from what's happening in soybeans. A lot of debate going on around at the moment about whether those conditions in the US have been detrimental to maize yields. Lots of reference back to 1993. This is really difficult stuff for the market to get its head around, and really it's going to be the reality of the harvest in the autumn before the market will have a clear indication of how production has been impacted. It's very difficult for forecasters to put any kind of accurate call on this one. Other parts of the world, staying in North America, certainly it's been too dry for key crops in Canada, although in recent days we have seen some rains returning. So all in all, it's a very complex picture for grain markets right now. Certainly, if we contrast it to where we were a year ago, where the market really just had one direction, which was downwards. This year, that isn't the case. We don't have a one-directional market. At the moment, we have a very uncertain market, so certainly one to keep up with, particularly as these collection of weather events pan out and the market really is looking for the harvest reality. Thank you.